Is he supposed to call?
Yeah, I think usually he's been coming in like 10 minutes like after we start.
Yeah.
So
I haven't had a chance to call him again yet. I really just like decided, or at least defined a little bit what I'd be writing on like a couple minutes ago.
Well, actually, I think I'm gonna like talk about this at the end, but he wants to like talk to like each of us. Like I have a call scheduled for Thursday, just about like the progress and like the stages we're at, and just kind of like do a little like touching base. So that should be happening soon. Cool. I'll keep you updated on that.
Sorry.
All right, okay, I am recording. All right, we don't have a slideshow for tonight, but we're just going to go over some things since you guys are going to be being introduced to your editors next week, which is exciting. So, oh wait, Professor Custer will not attend this workshop. He'll be doing one-on-ones with everyone the next week. Okay, that makes sense. I don't know, I was stressing out by getting to Zoom. Okay. And so instead of him joining us, we're going to watch a video that he sent us from YouTube. So let's check this out. Share my screen.
Great to see everyone.
Wait. All right.
We are in sort of week 4, and this is kind of the trend. Great to see everyone. Here we are in sort of week 4, and this is kind of the transition into the writing phase. It's an exciting week, and so I wanted to share kind of a video with you guys to watch in the session this week. And I'll be doing kind of reaching out to everyone to do one-on-one calls. This is sort of a good point for us to check in, see where you're at, and really do a couple things. Figure out where you're headed on your writing style, figure out what things you need help on in the next bit of time. We're sort of moving in the writing phase. You're going to be meeting your editor in the next week or so. You're going to be starting this process. So here we are kind of in the transition, the next point, and we're starting into phase 2 of the sort of the writing phase. So hope you're getting ready. Kind of, again, the first chunk of this time is really dedicated to helping you, build the content, ideas, and stuff that you want to write. We're going to come from, your interviews that you've been doing, from your personal analysis, as well as some of the secondary interviews you've been doing to find that inspiration from the content, as well as the credibility side. How are you learning things from the sort of research you've been doing in that way? So we're now going to be ready to start writing next week, and this session is really designed to help get you prepared for it, get you prepared for your first meeting with your editor, and really get rolling on the process of creating content. Now, remember, what we've sort of described here is this is sort of our 20-week journey. We've spent really these first 4 weeks focusing on this Get Smart phase, and now we're sort of moving into transition. And so this week is about preparing us to start to write stories. Now, the goal of what we've been doing here really is to create this knowledge, this content from our primary interviews and secondary interviews. Understand that, like, just because the sort of phase is sort of ending, it's not like it's done, right? You're going to be doing interviews over the next 6 months, most likely, like continuing to do things and add to it. Both primary and secondary. You're going to find that this kind of constant sense of knowledge capturing from people you talk to and people you sort of research will continue. And so continue to do those things. Remember, most authors, when they sort of finish their book, have done 10 to 15 first-person interviews and 10 to 15 sort of secondary interviews. So know this is a big part of it to make sure you have really rich content as well as really deep credibility into it. But now we're going to kind of get set up in the next phase of it. And so the big part of it is one of the things in interviewing all these authors, I learned that one of the patterns they all had in common was this sort of concept that I'm going to call their to-write list. And that is that most people have sort of a running list of things that they want to write. And what that does is make sure that they're never in a place where they don't have something to write. So what we do is we call that the story index. And the story index is sort of the inventory of all the things you could write and have written as a place for you and your editor to really keep tabs on progress. So that's really what it is it's a place that's going to be someplace for you to know where you're at as well as your editor and kind of keep constant communication. This really is a tool to make sure that the collaboration works really well. So we're going to talk for a minute about story writing just to give you a context of it, and then we'll set you up for sort of the workshop that you're going to be doing in today's session. Now, as we talked about in the very, very early phases, really a book is just a collection of stories that are tied together through the narrative and lessons in it. And so they're slightly different if it's a nonfiction or fiction. So I'll talk a little bit about both, but understand that at the core of all of these ones, there are stories, these pieces that sort of like really bring the whole book together. So it's just a collection of them. And so when you look at a nonfiction book, and I'll talk first about those, which most authors are working on, but there are several people doing poetry and fiction, which we'll talk about separately. Here's the analysis of it, right? Again, on average, most nonfiction authors that work with me have done around a 30 to 35,000 word manuscript, the final manuscript they have. And so when you analyze them, on average, their story length is about 750 words. It's kind of a longer-ish blog post as each one of these stories. And on average, that means they have somewhere between 20 and 45 stories, usually about 35 stories, these sort of smaller pieces that you have. And now, stories can mean a lot of things. That could be your own personal story. That could be something, that is from an interview you do. This could be research driven. You'll find they'll be coming from a lot of the things you've been doing to kind of inspire those pieces. So again, generally speaking, about 80% of your book is going to be these research these story elements that you're going to use. And effectively, like what you'll find is that a lot of those pieces are going to be the things that you're going to be writing, these little chunks along the way. So the core of it really is this story writing, this content building that we call stories. And again, they can be many different things, but all of them are sort of these chunks that we're going to be focused on for the next 10 weeks. Now, a fiction book is slightly different. And again, they're slightly longer. They tend to be a little bit closer to about 35,000 words on average, but really you see about 33 to 37,000 words. Again, part of this is based on what your audience wants to read. There's this kind of question that sometimes has like, oh, isn't my book supposed to be 50,000 words? It could, but a lot of that actually was driven by more what publishers wanted to see so they could sell books at a higher price point. The average consumer really wants about a 30,000 word book. That's what the reader wants to do. Much more than that, more than a 200-page book can feel daunting. So that's what you see kind of on average for the books in this case. They do tend to have a wider range. You see in fiction books, they tend to be more in the 720 to 1250 sort of words, sort of we call them stories or scenes, these sort of mini chunks. And that's kind of what you're going to be writing here is these individual stories or scenes that you're going to just be creating, not in any order, not in any structure, just creating those pieces. And again, what you'll find is that they do tend to be a little bit longer in some senses, more about 900 words, but you'll find some of them will be very short chunks. You may have a very, very short sort of story or scene. Some of them could be longer, but again, on average, you're seeing somewhere between 35 and 45 sort of these sort of scenes or stories that you're going to try and write. And again, when we assemble them into the manuscript, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, we'll be assembling all those pieces together. But for now, it really is just writing these small pieces. And again, why this matters is that as an author, it can be daunting to try and write a whole manuscript. So don't even bother with it. Just try and create individual pieces. And if you've already written pieces, great. Put them in your inventory as things you've already done that you're going to keep adding to as we go. So again, the key in fiction, the same thing, these stories and scenes, that's really the core. Remember, the core of what we're trying to do in the next chunk of it is we're not using an outline yet. We're really just writing individual stories and scenes to kind of create these individual pieces that we're going to assemble into our manuscript. It makes manuscript building so much more effective because you're not sort of trying to figure out exactly what it's about. You're just writing pieces and then assembling them together that makes something much better. So about halfway through the story writing, we'll get together and kind of do a deeper session on kind of what are the themes you're emerging, where might this go? And then really at the end of it, we'll start to actually build the structures that you'll plug all this content into. It's really, really great. And what I've seen is it creates a much, much, much better first draft, which again is why I think so many of these books come out in a way that is publishable through this process. So here's what you're going to be doing over the next 10 weeks as we start next week. You're going to be doing about 20,000 words of first draft stories or scenes. Could be a little bit more, could be a little bit less, but that's really the target. And so on average, what that means is your target should be about 2,000 words a week. Now, keep in mind, everyone will approach this differently. Some people are every week chipping away at it. Some people are a little more episodic. They'll crank out 5,000 words and take a couple weeks off and 5,000 more. Mm-hmm. Other people will sort of make a little bit of progress, and at the end, crank out a whole bunch. It all works differently, but that's sort of the target here. And again, having that many stories and scenes allows us to build your manuscript much more effectively. Even if you don't get there, remember, having this process of learning and capturing stuff will set us up for success when we build the manuscript, because you'll wind up having the knowledge to build the actual book you want versus what you think today. So it's a learning process that sets it up. So from this kind of, as we get to the end of it, you'll have some themes, you'll see some directions. It'll still take the work to build it from that point. And the last thing that you'll do is along this way, there'll be sort of 3 checkpoints, weeks 2, weeks 4, and weeks 9, where you'll sort of be trying to submit a bunch of content that you can to your editor for feedback. So again, whether you're making progress every week or whether you're doing it kind of more episodically, these 3 checkpoints are points when they'll sort of pull their comments to you and give you some feedback on how to continue. So weeks 2, weeks 4, and weeks 9 are sort of what we're going to have as those pieces coming forward. So one of the core things to know is that every one of you is going to have a slightly different path. So for this week, I'll also be trying to, over the next week or so, grab time with you to talk about where you're at, what you need, but also kind of your path. Are you someone who's going to be sort of an episodic writer? Are you someone who's a bit more like regular? You put time on the calendar? Or, do you look at your schedule and think, listen, I'm going to make what I can, but I know myself, it's going to be a deadline thing. I'm going to push at the end. Whatever works. My goal is to figure out what the path is. So we'll have that in our conversation, one-on-one chat to figure out how you're going to get there. So let me talk briefly about the concept of the story index. I'm going to show you a quick little demo of how to do it, and then you're going to spend today's session really focusing on that. Again, the story index is this core insight we had that in order to really keep yourself on track and keep your editor in the know, the core behind it is this concept called the story list, or sometimes, we'll call it the to write list. This idea here of what have you written? What do you want to write? This sort of running list of things. Now, again, the worst thing that you can do is basically start the week or start a day or get ready to sit down and write and say, I wonder what I should write today, right? You're going to find that inspiration is going to strike you and you want to be able to sit down and crank stuff out. If it's like, hey, my Saturday opened up, it's raining, I'm going to go into the coffee shop and write. You want to be ready to do that. And so that's partially what we're doing here, is kind of creating this sort of to-do list that you can write whenever you're inspired by. It doesn't say exactly what order, but it'll give you that inspirational sort of spark to say, hey, maybe I could write this one, or maybe I'm inspired to write this one. So again, we want to avoid this. Instead, we want you to say, let me pick something to write today that I've already done some work on. It kind of will keep you with momentum as opposed to the overwhelming feeling of, I don't know what I'm going to write. So the concept of the story index really is this running list. And I'll show you some examples. I will have an example of an author whose story index was about partway through when I shared, when I took this sort of example of it for you named Anish. I'll show you an example there in this, and we'll walk through a quick demo for you. But the story index really is a place for you to summarize here the people, the characters, the themes, the structures of the stuff you want to write. So for every single story or scene, you're going to keep a line in there. This is what you might write. Now, this could be a longer one or a shorter one. It sort of is up to you in that way. But the story index is a tool to personalize. It's a little bit like a running to-do list for you, a to-write list, but you can wind up updating it how you want. Most importantly, though, this is the tool that you're going to use to kind of communicate with your editor. Kind of where are you at? What's the progress like? What are things looking like? How's your writing going? So the key goal is to keep it updated. Every week of these sessions, you're going to spend a couple minutes making sure it's updated, making sure you share it in that way. It is important because, again, remember, your editor is someone who wants to know where you're at. It's not that they're checking up on you. They want to check in on you to sort of see how it is. And so they know where you're at and what's going on. So remember, the goal of the story index is something you're every week going to be sort of keeping updated, even if it's nothing sort of urgently that you're adding to it because you didn't make progress this week on any stories. That's fine. It's one of those things you want to keep updating, add things and ideas into it. You'll find it's a really powerful tool. Now, you may have other to-do lists that you do. You can simplify the story index if you don't want to put as much information in there, but this is the way that you and your editor are particularly going to communicate. So here's a quick example. You'll see I put this sort of sample from Anish Reddy has a book coming out this spring. It's about kind of a topic he was exploring around the idea of entrepreneurship through acquisition. So this idea that sort of entrepreneurs are now acquiring or buying businesses, sort of small businesses, and winding up kind of trying to figure out how to grow them. It's a new type of entrepreneurship. And so that's what his book is really about, that premise. So what I did here is I pulled an example of him. He's a student at UVA. So just to give you an example of some things there. And so here's kind of the journey he's taken. So as you'll see in this one, he's right here got his interviews dashboard, his research dashboard, and his story index. Remember, the interview dashboard is where you put the notes on the people you've interviewed or the notes on the people that you want to interview, tracking that one. The research dashboard is more where you do your secondary interviews, your research that you're doing, things you find interesting, kind of a running list there. And then the stories index is what we'll talk about today. It's kind of where you put the story ideas that emerge from that work. So just quickly to work through it, here's an example of some of the stuff Anish did. He really went for it. He used the stories, the interview dashboard to kind of really go into certain things. So you can see some of the names, the notes that he took on those sorts of people, and kind of some things that he had, what he was doing onto it. You also see kind of this list of interviews he did. He wound up doing about 20 interviews over the course of this entire process that he used to color his book. So that was kind of his approach, where he was. And again, this is stuff that happened over several months. So he wasn't at this point at the very beginning, but one of those things that, again, shows sort of his progress along the way. Here's his research dashboard, again, which is another example that we talked about kind of in last week's session, focusing on this concept of the secondary interview. So for example, it shows the names of the people who he was researching, the article that he found, some key quotes and things like that, the story ideas and the other sources that he had. So these are some examples of how he used his interview dashboard, or excuse me, his interview dashboard and research dashboard. Now, again, you may have varying levels of this. Remember, he continued to update this as he went, but this is sort of the way that he did it. You may decide to sort of skip some of this and jump right into the stories index. Totally up to you, but I want to show you sort of how these things evolve. So here is an example of his story index. Now, this is kind of what he used as his sort of running to-do list, to write list. So what you'll see here is a sort of a series of ideas of things that he could write and things that he might want to write at one point. So I'll quickly show you it. Again, the first one is a story that he's putting together about this, sort of acquirer entrepreneur named Irv, and it talks about some detailed themes that he's got in there. The theme of maybe the thing he wants to write on, who's the hero or the main character, and supporting characters, the story arc that he wants to do, any takeaways, and kind of the status of it. You see that he basically tags his editor when he's ready for review on that one, and has a link to each one of the articles plus the word count. So this is, again, basically a way for him to keep himself and his editor updated on things. So again, what all of us are going to try to do this week, particularly today, is populate the first 6 to 10 story ideas that you might have that you might want to work on over the next couple of weeks. The idea here is to say, what do I know? What are the first waves of stories? So these would be the first types of things they wanted to do, the notes that he wanted to have. So I'll give you a quick example, right? This is, again, something from his research dashboard. So if he went out and did this research, he found this YouTube interview where of this guy, Harold Irving Grousbeck. And so again, the title of the talk, the details of it, he has all this sort of stuff in it. And then some notes, right? He took some notes on it and sort of here's some quotes that he has, this sort of concept there. He's got some story ideas from it, more quotes in it. This is sort of the research work that he was doing, his secondary interview on this guy named Irv. So what he did is he actually turned that into a story idea. And here's, again, the details of it. The theme of it is he wanted to talk about these concepts called search firms, these search firms you could use, and more details and quotes about what he thinks it could be, who that person was, any backups, his partner named Amos, the story arc that he has in it, and the takeaways. You won't get it right the first time, the second time, the third time, but eventually get it right when it's right. His status, that he'd done a draft of it, that it was ready for review for his editor, and they link to it. And again, you can link to stories that I'll show you just by putting @ and the name of the story, and then the word count that he had for that piece. So again, I'm going to run through a quick example for you just so you can see how it plays out here in Quip. So let me see if I can open up Quip as we're recording this here. And so here in Quip is an example. Again, I'm going to put this in the sample folders for you guys to see so you can see it. Again, I think you've got the dashboard, the interview dashboard and the research dashboard. Here's Anisha's story index. So I'm going to open up the stories index just so we can see it here. And again, this looks just exactly like what we saw in here, right? So you can see what this is. So what I'm going to do really quickly is I'm going to basically show you how to kind of spend some time today. Now, let's say, for example, I'm going to go into his interview dashboard, and let's just basically say here that, Tom Feynman is someone that he wound up deciding to do, and then let's see this one. We've got this sort of maybe idea down here, which is this guy, Sandro. I'm going to take this here. Sandro Mina. So we're going to basically start to populate our story index. So here's we go. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to just create a new sort of story document. So let's just say that the story document that I want to do here is I want to do Sandro Mina story, right? At this point, that's all that I've got. And then I'm going to take some notes here on this sort of concept here. Here's the quote, Sandro Mina. And then let's just say the lesson here is, kind of that's the person. And then the lesson or the takeaway I've got is, in this case, or maybe the theme of it is, there are always problems, right? Always. That's maybe the story that I want to do. And I've got some notes in here. So now I've got basically a few things in here that I could eventually write up, right? This is sort of the couple points. I've got some quotes in here. I've got some things in here. See if there's anything else from his research dashboard that I find about Sandro Mina that could be helpful. See, I'll go back in here. Do I have anything else in here? Yeah, nothing to the origin story in the talk. So there you go. Not a lot in it. But so now we've got this basically sort of this story here. So let's just say that, eventually I'm going to be inspired to write. I've got some of my notes in there. Maybe if I've got, I could paste, if this is a primary interview, I could paste, paste interview notes. I've got, paste some links. again, basically I just have some stuff in here so that when I'm ready to write. Now, once I start writing, let's just say, I start writing this thing and, I write, write. So there we go. So now what I'm going to do is I've got this I've got some notes of things that I might want to write in this one. This is, again, just a story idea. So you're going to try and do 6 to 10 of these. Again, high level, some notes and thoughts on it. What you're going to then do is you're going to basically go back and you're going to add this to your stories index. So I'm going to go into this sample story index, and let's just say that I don't have any here, but I'm going to basically go in and I'm going to add this in. So the hero in this case is Sandro Mina. Maybe some other notes. It's about, we'll just say it's about the problem solving. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically link to it. So I'm going to put an @ sign. So just the @ sign, Sandro Mina story. So there I've got this here, and I'm going to mention it in this case. And so now I basically just I can write my notes here that it's outlined in this case or whatever it may be, and basically kind of keep myself on track. So here now I have this sort of thing, and then when I look at it and I'm ready to write, I can say, what do I need to write? What do I want to write? Maybe I decide I want to write this one about Seamus Hines, or maybe I want to write something about Jim Southern or whatever it is. And I basically just will go in and start to write on this one. I'll just sort of basically say, great, I've got the Sandro Mina story. And again, you'll see, there's an example here of the Irv story, some sort of details on what he had and how he wrote it. But again, just some sort of concepts of how he had sort of some stories, ideas, some pieces, some notes that he wound up turning into the story. So that's really, again, the goal of how you're going to use your story index. And then when you're ready for review, you just basically will tag your editor on it and say, great, like the Sandro Mina article is ready for your review. You can either tag them, or you can basically take a note here. You can basically say, let's just say, at Shonda, if Shonda Lane is my editor, I can just tag her and say, this is ready for review. So that's, again, that way I could do it in that way. I could tag my editor and that sort of thing. So however you're ready to use this one, that's kind of the way to do it. So again, next week you're going to be being connected to your editor. The goal is when you sit down with your editor to have this document ready for them to sort of talk about. Now, you'll have your overall idea here and talk about some of those things, but they sort of want to know what's coming. What are the stories you want to write in these sorts of pieces? So this week, the goal is to create those pieces for you. So that's the main stuff that I have here. Let me get back into my slides here and take you through the last pieces. Again, this week, try and lay out 6 to 10 initial stories in your story index. Just ideas you have, personal stories, stories from research, stories from interviews, just stories that you want to write, those scenes and stories that you want to do so that you can discuss it with your editor. Again, you may not write all of these ones. They don't even have to be that detailed, but just for now, lay out those ideas for you. And then make sure you have fun, right? This is sort of this week because we're going to spend the entire time today doing a little bit of follow-up, a little bit of outreach, and then really focusing on populating your story index so that you have something to talk with them. And again, it's a powerful tool that you're going to find is really great for you to continue to make progress and continue to go on. So we're getting to the next phase of it. I hope you're having fun. It's been certainly an adventure. I'll be checking in with y'all over the next kind of week or so to grab some time with me, talk about where you're at, where you're headed. And we're off to the races, guys. Congratulations on making it to this next phase. And now we start to write.
All right. I watch a lot of makeup tutorials. I'm sorry. That's all up there. All righty. Cool. Wow, it's too close. So I know that was a ton of information, and I will send you guys this video. I'm going to try to get better about sending it sooner than the day before our meeting. But did that make sense, like, generally?
Yeah,
okay.
Definitely.
Okay. And you guys you're both in Quip, and you have, like, your folders and stuff set up. So.
I don't think I have the story index actually set up.
Yeah, I haven't really started putting much in there yet, but definitely this week work on it.
Yeah, I honestly don't really have that much in mine either. But let me pull up the stories index.
Oh, I do. Just kidding.
Yeah.
It's like almost dead, so.
Oh, that's okay. No worries. That's like the story of my life. So yeah, mine is like kind of, I mean, I actually do have like content in here, but I've only written like one of these stories. But I don't even think mine's set up properly because my editor actually sent me a message saying like, here's how you're supposed to do it. But yeah, I mean, we just looked at it in the video, but this is like a little bit of like what it'll look like. Like you have your story number, the theme that you're going for, a detailed theme, the people that are mentioned like in your story arc. I've been learning a lot more about that recently. I honestly need to research that more to figure out like exactly what that is. Takeaways, like when you're reading a story, like what do you want your reader to take away? And then you have this little like check mark thing where you can write that you're ready for it to be reviewed by your editor. And you just tag them like at the end, like my editor's name is Anastasia, and I just tagged her there, and then I added the document that I had written into the Quip link section. Okay. So it'll all make sense. Like I'll send you guys that video, so this way, like when you're going about doing this, like you can kind of watch this like for more instructions. But back to
Is there a way to import documents from like Word into Quip?
That's a great question, honestly. I haven't done that yet, just because like the stories I've written in Quip.
Oh, just kidding. It says you can, if you click on the little right thing, it says upload or import.
Okay, yeah, I figured that would have to be a possibility.
And where do we put those?
The stories. So
do they go into like the create manuscript or create stories?
So in your folder, yeah, in the create stories folder. So yeah, see, here's my create stories folder. And when I did, if you like wanted to add from like Word, from Microsoft Word, you could do that too. But if you wanted to like write in Quip, you just like go to compose and then new document, and it'll add a new document to your write stories folder.
Okay.
So yeah, this is like the story that I have so far, and this is just a little, I have a lot of edits to fix, but a little bit like what it looks like with your editor. Basically, it's kind of like Google Doc, where if you like highlight something, you can write a comment. So like, she thought this sentence could be like moved somewhere else, so she highlighted it and just like added a comment. So yeah, and like you can communicate like on this section, like in the conversation thing. So pretty cool. So yeah, that video, use the remaining time to have everyone set up and populate their stories index. So I know you don't have your laptop. I feel bad that you don't have your laptop. But basically, I think like what we're supposed to do during this session is just like work on our story index, like he said, and just like come up with ideas. So even if you don't have your computer, like if you just want to be like brainstorming.
Yeah, I'll probably use my phone to do some, gather some sources.
Definitely.
Because primarily I was like thinking we had to do like the in-person interviews before we started doing like research.
No, yeah.
But I definitely think I would be like more like research heavy. So I'm gonna search for like some articles and academic papers and stuff, so I could start building that side of my document.
Another thing is like he mentioned in like one of the sessions I was in too, like I don't have all the interviews completed that I want, like I'm still working on it. So like don't feel like you have to like wait until you're done with all your interviews and like all your research to start writing stories. Because he actually recommended like getting a story to your editor within the first week, just so you can like kind of get the ball rolling and like get to know their style and stuff. So yeah, if you want to like be like writing stories while you're still having like interviews scheduled, like that's completely fine. So
okay,
yeah,
good deal.
Yeah. So yeah, this just recommends like during this time to try to populate your story index with 6 to 10 initial stories and scenes. And you don't have to like add everything right now, but just like as much detail as you possibly can. And add all these stories in their order. Stories folder. So once we do that, we could work on that for like maybe like 20 minutes. And then we're gonna wrap up, and it just says like before you meet your editor next week, just make sure to have like these 6 to 10 stories in there. And like I said, that's not like actually writing the stories, but just like the outlines. So yeah, editor introductions will happen before next week's session. So I don't know exactly what day that is, but hopefully he'll let us know.
Okay.
But yeah, so just I guess we can all work on just populating like some story ideas, and also if you have like anybody else you need to follow up with, like feel free to be working on that. But really the goal is to work on these story indexes.
Is there a reason there's like 3 slots for people on the story index?
I guess just if you have like multiple people in your story.
It doesn't really matter.
Yeah. Like if you had interviewed someone and they were like talking about someone else that was like major in their story, you could add that.
Okay.
Yeah. And while you guys are working on that, I'm gonna go back and look for like content about how to interview and how to like send messages to people, to reach out to people, so I can give that lovely information to you guys.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah, definitely. You're good. I just sent you guys a message with some videos he had recommended, like that we watch for holding a successful interview. And now I'm gonna send you. This was like a template that he had sent a while ago to like the president's group, just about how to like compose a message to somebody that you wanted to interview. So I'm gonna send that to you guys as well.
Thank you.
No problem.
I thought it was like an alarm.
I know, it
I'm
sounded
just
like
the
a
room next to
cat. I
us.
was like, what the heck? Okay, sorry. So I sent this, for some reason this message like was spaced weird, but obviously like don't format it like that. But yeah, so here's like the format for like LinkedIn if you're reaching out to somebody, and then here is it on email. Yeah, no problem. Another thing, sorry to interrupt you guys like while you're kind of brainstorming here, but when we were talking about interviews in that session where we like went over that over winter break, we what the something like important to remember like when you're doing interviews is like a lot of times I'll think I have like this amazing interview and then like I'll come back and be like, oh my gosh, like I have no information to write this story. So like what you want to make sure to do is like, since we are turning these interviews like into stories, is make sure you're asking people like for their personal stories, like instead of just asking basic information like who are you, like what do you do. So like he actually gave us this kind of like format of how to go about the interviews. Let me see if I can find it in my notes. It's kind of a while back, but the thing that stuck out to me in that is like he talked about when you're asking someone like a question like tell me about a time when like I'm trying to think. So like for me, like writing my book about like Christian writing, if I wanted to say like, what is the biggest challenge about like writing a Christian book? And then my next question might be, can you give me some examples of like the challenges you face? So this kind of like this technique kind of urges them to tell you a story, like, you know, since you're asking for examples. So that's just like a really important thing I would like highlight is making sure you're asking for examples of things like of the questions you're asking, just so you're able to get some stories in there and you're able to like build up some good stories. So yeah. Sorry about that. Okay, how's everybody doing?
I found a few good sources.
Good. Okay.
I'm gonna read up on some of them and then show them in the talk tonight.
The stories index. Awesome. How's it going?
Good. Got to tie some themes that I've already written on into like how I want to shape them into stories.
Nice. Awesome. Cool. Well, yeah, we have like just a couple minutes left, but yeah, I would just recommend like over the next like 2 to 4 days, just like really working on getting like at least 6 story ideas in your story index, 6 to 10. And yeah, because that obviously needs to be done before you meet your editor. And yeah, editor introductions will happen before next week's session, which is super exciting. But yeah, I recorded this and I'm going to try to send this one out like either tonight or tomorrow, just as soon as possible. So you guys can have that video of like how to set up your story index. And other than that, I sent you guys information on interviewing and reaching out to people. But yeah, I think that's it. So if you guys have any other questions, please let me know. And yeah. Yeah, no problem.
Really fast. Is there a way to say that I would prefer a Christian editor at all, or is that already pretty much set up?
That's a great question.
Because I can work without one, but it'd be easier
Yeah.
if they like understand where I'm coming from.
Right.
It's such a Christ-centered book.
Maybe you could reach out to Eric, like through, you know how you can just like on chat, you can just like go to chat and then create a new chat and then just write Eric. And you could just like tell him like what you're thinking, like you prefer to have a Christian editor, because I know my editor's Christian, so like that worked out like super cool. So yeah, I would just recommend reaching out to him.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah.
Perfect.